1, 2, 3, 4.
We don't want another war.
5, 6, 7, 8.
Stop the killing, stop the hate.
Don't attack! Don't attack Iraq! Don't attack! Don't attack Iraq!
We're facing the grim reality of yet another war conducted by Western powers in the Middle East, now potentially with the support of our government and the involvement of British troops. It's almost beyond belief that just 3 years after the end of the last catastrophic episode in Iraq, British politicians are going to be asked to vote on launching a new military escapade. It's as if there's a collective amnesia that has embraced the British establishment. There have been 3 major wars in the last 13 years that the British government and the British forces have been involved in. Every one of them has been a catastrophe. We are here to say that British people are against these wars, that there is a democratic deficit in this country, the British people are not being listened to, and we are going to campaign to try and stop this war. But if, heaven forbid, British bombs and US bombs start to rain down on Iraq over the weekend, we are going to redouble our efforts, we are going to escalate our protests, we are going to keep campaigning until the catastrophe ends. This is just clearly the first in what will be a cycle of protests that we are going to be organising. But one of the things that we need to do urgently is to popularise and promote the basic and important arguments for why military action will be a disaster. Every time they have a new justification, a new excuse for wars in the Middle East and Central Asia, we were told it was essential to attack Afghanistan in order to crush the Taliban. 13 years later and tens of thousands of deaths later, the Taliban are stronger than ever. We were told the Saddam regime had to be destroyed in order to introduce democracy into Iraq. Well, Iraq is a broken country, a destroyed infrastructure, and a country that has lost up to 500,000 people. There have been millions of people that have been turned into refugees, and the country is on the brink of breakup. We were told it was essential to bomb Libya because we had to avoid a massacre. In the weeks and months after the bombing started, at least 30,000 people died in what is now a failed state with no recognisable government. This is the fruit of these kind of policies. This is the fruit of the imperialist policies that have been pursued by successive British governments, and we must do everything we can to stop this cycle of violence. We have a number of speakers now who are going to put forward some of the arguments about why the vote should be no tomorrow, and I'm very pleased to introduce the first of them. He's an Iraqi exile. He's a tireless campaigner against war. He's from the Iraqi Democrats Against War and Occupation. His name is Sami Ramadani. Give him a big round of applause. Sami Ramadani.
Thank you, Chris. I was listening to Cameron's speech to the United Nations, and he said, we are going to join this war because Britain defends, stands by. He counted 3 things: freedom, democracy, and justice. And who are our allies to establish this lovely freedom, democracy, and justice? Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain. I needn't go through the list, but all the most brutal dictatorships of the Middle East have joined in the bombing campaigns to get rid of the enemies of freedom and democracy and justice in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia beheads people in public every Friday. Every Friday, several people get beheaded in public in Saudi Arabia. So how come we are not bombing Saudi Arabia today? We're not bombing them because we need the oil, because we need strategic outposts, because the United States wants to control the region more firmly. They feel that the uprisings in Egypt, in Tunisia, across the Arab world, in Bahrain, has destabilized their control over the Middle East. And the best way they could find, because they failed last year, remember, they wanted to attack Syria. And the British people said no. British Parliament, for the first time in 300 years, voted against war. That disrupted their plan to bomb Syria. So today they turned the public round through the savagery of the beheadings that ISIS, the terrorist group, has done. They turned the public round. But it's the same plan, the same approach, which is that every time they feel that their interests are threatened in the area, they try to introduce military campaigns, wars. And their system, this rotten capitalist system, encourages war. Because war means more profits. It means their modern technology survives and grows on spreading wars. And the Middle East has become one of the main centers for starting wars and world tensions. The strategy they are following today to get rid of ISIS is really a strategy to strengthen terrorism in the Middle East. Because terrorism helps them to provide the pretext to intervene, to launch wars, to build more military bases. The newest, biggest military base in the Middle East being built and rebuilt and extended today is near Erbil in Iraqi Kurdistan. They want to turn Iraqi Kurdistan into one of their biggest military bases in the Middle East for future wars, maybe a war against Iran or attacks even against other areas where they feel that the United States are threatened. The world peace movement must see through this, that fighting terrorism has become a pretext for new wars, for new imperialist wars, and for crushing the people's struggle for genuine democracy, genuine freedom. The anti-war movement is an important component of fighting against new wars of aggression. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sami. Our next speaker is once again someone who's been involved in campaigning against wars for decades. She's been central to the Stop the War campaign over the various different wars our governments have been involved in. She's General Secretary of CND. She's called Kate Hudson. Give her a big round of applause. Kate Hudson.
Thanks very much indeed, Chris. I've got just two messages for the MPs that are going to be going in there tomorrow to vote. The first is stop denying the reality of history, stop denying our role and responsibility in the Middle East. Most of us here over the last decade or more have seen the reality of what our government today has done in Iraq and the Middle East. We know about the war lies, the illegal bombing and all that. That's one thing they must remember, and that must shape their decisions and judgments. And also looking back further than that, over the last century or more, the role of Britain and other imperialist powers in the Middle East. Because if you take that together, the history of the last century and the history of the last decade, you will understand, they will understand, that ISIS is our creation. It is the creation of Western imperialism, and it is not going to be destroyed by more of the same. That's the reality. There has to be a new settlement in the Middle East based on truth, peace, justice and equality of share out of resources amongst the countries that own those resources. That's number one. And the second point I would like to make to our MPs for tomorrow is please stop making up law as you go along, okay? There are two things they need to understand when they go in there tomorrow. One, there are only two legal reasons, legitimate reasons to go to war. This is under the UN Charter and international law. It's in self-defence. Well, that is not in our self-defence to go and bomb anywhere in the Middle East, so that's out. And the second is if the UN Security Council agrees to intervention, actually calls for military intervention. Now, you may know they talked about the UN Security Council meeting that was taking place last night. Lots of puff about it in advance, but not much after, probably because the UN Security Council did not agree that there should be military intervention in Iraq. Now, if you've been listening to the media, you may be forgiven for thinking that actually it is legal because the Iraqi government has asked for military aid. Under international law, that is not relevant. That does not count. Okay, if they want to rewrite international law so they can do that legally, fine. But now, today, tomorrow, it is illegal to go into Iraq under the current circumstances. So tomorrow, any MPs, don't come up with the lie that it is legal to go and bomb Iraq, because it's not. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kate.
David Cameron, hear us say.
Dropping bombs, no way.
David Cameron, hear us say.
Airstrikes, no way.
Now, in the next few days and weeks, we're going to have to be organising protests, demonstrations, marches, direct action everywhere we can, right across the country. And one important element of that will be making sure that there are meetings and protests in university campuses and amongst students everywhere we can possibly organise them. And I'm pleased to announce now our next speaker is Zara Sultana. She's from the NUS Black Students Campaign. She too has been central to arguing the case, putting the case against war. Please give Zara a big round of applause.
Assalamu alaikum. So I'm standing here as a Muslim, as a Briton, and as a representative of the NUS Black Students Campaign, which represents 1.4 million students of Arab, Asian, Caribbean and African heritage. A year ago, David Cameron, William Hague and British ministers agreed to send shipments of arms to Syrian rebels. A year later, we are now discussing whether or not we should bomb these very rebels that we helped to arm only a year ago. When British soldiers were sent into Afghanistan, we were told that they would be there only for 3 years and not a single gunshot would be used. 10 years later, with over tens of thousands of dead people, negotiations with the Taliban, and a country in complete ruins. And we keep on hearing these imperialist lies from Iraq when we were told that there were weapons of mass destruction. Did we find any? No. We were told that Al-Qaeda and the Iraqi government working together, all of these were proved to be complete, utter lies. Remember, Britain, the US, claimed to set up a democratic state in Iraq. Hundreds of thousands of people dead, a country bloody from sectarian civil conflicts, and yet again we come here with these banners asking not to bomb Iraq again. How many times are we going to continuously come out and demand our government not to be complicit in war crimes, illegal wars and the deaths of millions? So unfortunately Malia couldn't be here, who's the Black Students Officer, but on their behalf we have some demands. And the first one is to end all British military intervention in Syria and Iraq, to end the attack on civil liberties, especially to the Muslim community who have continuously been demonised by British foreign policy and anti-terror legislation. Coming from Birmingham, I come from a community that has been spied on, a community that has been terrorised, a community that continuously has to come out and say everything that is happening is not in our name. How many times can we say and come out and continuously defend ourselves as Britons in this country? Also, on a final note, we need to also question other things. Why isn't the UK investing all this money it has for bombs in our healthcare system, in our education system? This money does not need to be killing people. Rather than let's invest in our communities, which are broken. Thank you, and on that note,
Thanks very much, Zara.
They say warfare, we say warfare. 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 When they say warfare, we say warfare. 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 Warfare.
Now, there's many things that we can all do in the next few days to build the campaign. One of them is make sure that if you haven't done already, you lobby your MP. There's a mechanism for doing it. Already thousands of people have sent emails to their MP. Go onto the Stop the War website to make it easy, but make sure tonight, you've only got a few hours, make sure you do that to put the pressure on and to maximise the feelings of ordinary people, and make sure that the MPs are aware of where people stand on these issues. Secondly, we need to make sure that in every community, in every area in London and up and down the country, there are people out on the streets petitioning and putting the arguments against war. We're going to have to do that everywhere. Make sure you do it this Saturday. Thirdly, keep your eye on social media, keep your eye on the websites, because we are going to have protests and demonstrations wherever we can. Next weekend, next Saturday, if the vote goes for war, if the vote goes for bombing, we're going to call a massive protest in central London on Saturday. Put that in your diary, start spreading the word now, and make sure you check the details over the weekend on the websites. I'd now like to introduce our last speaker, who's the chair of Stop the War Coalition. His name's Jeremy Corbyn. You probably know him well, a great spokesperson and campaigner against war. Give him a big welcome. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Chris, and I'll be very brief because this is a short rally but a very important one. Big thank you to all of you for coming here at very short notice today on the eve of yet another parliamentary debate about bombing of another country. Thank you very much for showing that you care, you want peace, and you don't want people to die from British, American, French, or indeed anybody else's bombs. Thank you very much for showing that. Secondly, I'm the only MP here tonight, but sometimes it feels a bit lonely in there, but I'm not alone. And I do bring greetings from Caroline Lucas, from Diane Abbott, and from John McDonnell for tonight's demonstration. And you would have seen that the letter we had published in The Guardian a couple of days ago set out our position on that. And I've just been across to Downing Street to hand that letter in. Unfortunately, Mr. Cameron was incredibly busy and didn't have time to invite me in to discuss the details of the letter, which you're all disappointed about, but nevertheless, I hope he's reading it. I've just received a copy of the motion that's going to be put to the House of Commons tomorrow. It's quite long, so I won't read it all to you, but essentially, what it says is that it authorises and supports the Prime Minister in responding to an invitation from the Iraqi government to take part in aerial bombardment against ISIL forces within Iraq. And it claims that this is a wholly legal process. I would just raise a number of questions, and I think MPs are there to ask questions. One, if the bombing doesn't achieve what it's supposed to achieve, I suspect we're going to be called back and asked to authorise bombing in Syria next. And if that doesn't achieve what it's supposed to achieve, we're then going to be invited back a third time to authorise the use of ground forces to invade the rest of Iraq and Syria. And if that doesn't work, what then? Because we've invaded Afghanistan 13 years ago. We've invaded Iraq 11 years ago. We invaded Libya a couple of years ago. We invaded Mali. As I speak, there are people dying in the Mediterranean who are victims of every single one of those wars, trying to escape the misery and oppression of their lives to get into Italy and escape what they've suffered from there. And whilst I hold no brief whatsoever for ISIL forces or their human rights or whatever they're trying to do, and I don't suppose anybody here does either, I would just say, be careful with whom you walk, because we are taking part in bombardment in a coalition which includes Saudi Arabia. Even the Foreign Office's own website has severe criticisms of the human rights record of Saudi Arabia. The public beheadings, the chopping off of limbs, the expulsion of migrant workers, and many, many other things. So where are we going to be condemning the human rights abuses and public executions in Saudi Arabia if we're bombing Iraq alongside them because somebody else is committing human rights abuses? At the end of the day, every single war, every single conflict is settled by some kind of political process. Some kind of political process by the people most affected, i.e. those that actually live there. So instead of starting yet another war, why aren't we supporting a political process? Why aren't we supporting a political dialogue? Why aren't we supporting a human rights dialogue? Why instead are we going into yet another war in a region full of natural resources that the West so covets, using arms that we've sold to every regime in the region, proposing to sell yet more arms, more bombs, more wars? I tell you this, every war and every occupation has a consequence. I don't want young people to join ISIL. I don't want young people going off to throw themselves into war and end their precious and therefore short lives as a result of it. Therefore, if we go in, what's going to happen? But more people are going to go in, the war will deepen, more will die, more bitterness, more hatred, more wars, more loss, more disaster, and more insecurity for us and the rest of the world. I say to my colleagues tomorrow, when they come to vote, think of the hand of history. Did you do the right thing when you voted to go into Afghanistan in 2001 because of what happened, the dreadful thing that happened in New York at that time? Did you do the right thing in 2003 when you voted to bomb Iraq and all the thousands that died and the human rights abuses at Abu Ghraib and Fallujah and the extraordinary rendition and Guantanamo Bay and all that followed from that? Did you do the right thing when you randomly bombed in Libya and destroyed the whole infrastructure of a state and left it in a civil war of which there is apparently no end? Think again. Do the right thing tomorrow and say no to yet another war and yet more bombardment, and yes to supporting peace, political dialogue, and a process that will lead us in the direction of peace, not the endless wars that the 21st century has so far brought us. Friends, thank you for coming tonight. Thank you for caring, and thank you for working so hard for peace.
Thanks, Jeremy. This is just the beginning. We have to end this madness. We have to break the cycle of violence. Please make sure, stick around now and make some noise. Make sure you give your names or join the Stop the War Coalition. Download the petition. If they do vote for war tomorrow, on Saturday, we want there to be anti-war presences in every high street, in every community, up and down the country. Make sure you get that organised, and make sure you spread the word that next Saturday we're going to have the biggest possible protest against this carnage. Keep campaigning, keep organising. We're going to stop this madness. Thank you very much.
We know the facts that you choose to the sky. When millions and millions are losing their lives. We know your plans are contrived to put fear in the skies, and the barrels of oil means barrels of lives. We know that corporatocracy is next to reject us. We know the military-industrial complex is a hex to us. We know that your banking crisis directly affects us when you neglect to protect us. We know the lies in Iraq and Afghanistan. We know your terrorist of Bin Laden, Gaddafi, Saddam, we know the truth, that you seek to hold